The Great Hall of Nexus Prime was the largest structure ever built by any species in the known galaxy. Its walls stretched upward for nearly a mile, covered in crystals that glowed with the light of 1,000 different suns. 412 species had sent their representatives here, each one taking their place in the circular chamber that served as the heart of galactic civilization. Some floated in tanks of specialized atmosphere. Others perched on branches designed for their particular anatomy. A few existed only as projected consciousness, their physical forms too large or too dangerous to bring into the station. Ambassador Linda Morrison stood at the podium reserved for humanity, wearing the formal black uniform of the United Earth's Diplomatic Corps. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen too many negotiations fail and too many wars begin. Behind her, the blue and green flag of United Earth hung motionless in the recycled air. Humanity had earned this position only 50 years ago, after their ships first encountered the Volanthi exploration fleet at the edge of the Sol system. 50 years was nothing in galactic terms. Some of the species in this room had been traveling between stars when humans were still learning to make fire. Hi. Arbiter Vexelin presided over the assembly from a raised platform at the center of the chamber. His body was made entirely of living crystal, shaped roughly like a humanoid but standing nearly 12 feet tall. Light passed through him and emerged in rainbow patterns that shifted with his mood. He had held this position for 3,000 years, guiding the Council through wars and plagues and disasters that had threatened to tear the galaxy apart. His voice, when he spoke, resonated directly in the minds of everyone present, translated instantly into their native languages. Today's session was meant to be routine. Trade agreements, border disputes, the usual business of keeping 400 species from killing each other. But Ambassador Morrison noticed something strange as she took her seat. The older species, the ones who had been part of the Council for millennia, were watching the Kreth delegation with an expression she could only describe as dread. The Kreth were reptilian beings, standing 7 feet tall with scales the color of dried blood. They had joined the Council only 800 years ago, after conquering 63 inhabited worlds and forcing the Council to acknowledge them as a major power. Their empire was built on war, their culture centered on combat and domination. Supreme Commander Sithrak sat in their designated area, his yellow eyes scanning the chamber with barely concealed contempt. He had requested time to address the assembly, and High Arbiter Vextolen had reluctantly granted it. Sithrak rose from his seat and walked to the central speaking platform. His clawed feet clicked against the crystalline floor, each step deliberate and threatening. He wore the ceremonial armor of a Kreth warlord, decorated with the bones of defeated enemies. "The Council has grown weak," he began, his voice a deep growl that the translation systems rendered into cold, clear words. "For too long, we have allowed inferior species to claim resources that should belong to the strong. The Kreth Dominion will no longer tolerate this imbalance." Ambassador Morrison felt her stomach tighten. She had read the intelligence reports about Kreth fleet movements. She knew what was coming. The human colony on the world they call Verdant IV occupies territory that rightfully belongs to the Dominion. Sithrak continued. "We have decided to correct this error. As of this moment, our fleet has established a blockade around the planet. The humans have 72 hours to surrender their colony and withdraw from 3 additional systems. If they refuse, we will take what is ours by force." The chamber erupted in noise. Dozens of species shouted objections. Others simply fell silent, their representatives exchanging looks of horror. Ambassador Morrison rose to her feet, her voice cutting through the chaos. "This is an act of war," she said, her words carrying across the vast space. "The Kreth Dominion is attacking a civilian population of 2 million people. This violates every principle this council was founded to protect." Sithrak turned to face her, his lips pulling back to reveal rows of serrated teeth. "Your species is young, human. You have been among the stars for less than a heartbeat. You do not understand how the galaxy truly works. The strong take what they want. The weak submit or die. This has always been the way." High Arbiter Vextolen raised one crystalline hand, and the chamber fell silent. When he spoke, his mental voice carried a weight of sadness that Morrison had never heard before. "Supreme Commander Sithrak," the Arbiter said slowly, "I must remind you of the Council's standing directive regarding humanity. This directive was issued 3 centuries ago, when we first detected their radio signals. It has been reaffirmed by every Arbiter since that time. The directive is simple. Do not provoke humanity. Do not test them. Do not underestimate them." Sithrak laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed through the hall. "I have studied human military history, Arbiter. They fight among themselves with primitive weapons. They have never faced a true galactic power. Their fleet is small, their technology inferior, their species young and inexperienced. The Kreth have crushed civilizations far more advanced than these hairless apes." Morrison watched as several of the ancient species began quietly leaving the chamber. The Volanthi ambassador, a being of pure energy contained in a specialized suit, paused beside her seat on the way out. "I am sorry," the Volanthi said, their voice like wind chimes in a storm. "We have seen what happens when humanity is pushed too far. We will not see it again. Our people are already evacuating from the nearby systems." "What do you mean?" Morrison asked, genuinely confused. "What do you know about us that we do not know about ourselves?" The Volanthi hesitated for a long moment. "You are still young. You have not yet realized what you truly are. But the old ones remember. We remember the simulations we ran when we first found you. We remember the projections of what your species would become. The Kreths see your small fleet and think you are weak. They do not understand that you are something far more dangerous than a large fleet could ever be." Before Morrison could respond, the Volanthi was gone, their energy form gliding quickly toward the exit. On Earth, the news of the blockade reached President Daniel Hayes within minutes. He sat in the Situation Room beneath the White House, surrounded by his military advisors and cabinet members. The holographic display showed the positions of Kreth warships around Verdant 4, 47 vessels forming an impenetrable ring around the agricultural colony. Admiral Catherine Blake, commander of the United Earth Defense Force, presented the tactical assessment. She was a tall woman with iron-gray hair, cut short in military fashion, and her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had spent 40 years preparing for exactly this moment. "The Kreth fleet outweighs our nearest response force by a factor of 4, she said, highlighting the relevant data on the display. "Conventional military doctrine suggests we should negotiate by time, build up our forces before any engagement." President Hayes studied the display for a long moment. "What is your recommendation, Admiral?" Blake's expression did not change. "My recommendation, sir, is that we show the galaxy what happens when someone threatens our people. Captain Samuel Grant and the Resolute are 6 hours from Verdant 4. I suggest we let him introduce the Kreth to the reality of human warfare." The President nodded slowly. "Send the order. An Admiral. Make sure they understand this is not a negotiation." Blake allowed herself a small smile. "Understood, sir? The Kreth wanted to test humanity. They are about to receive their answer." The Kreth blockade hung in space like a wall of iron and fire. 47 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could turn a continent to glass. Supreme Commander Sithrak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching the empty space where the human response would eventually appear. He had given them 72 hours to surrender. They had used 60 of those hours in silence. Now finally, his sensors detected the approaching fleet. Sithrak leaned forward in his command chair, his claws digging into the armrests with anticipation. The display showed 12 vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge. Of the system, 12. He commanded 47. The largest human ship, something they called the Resolute, was barely half the size of his flagship. By every calculation his officers could make, this should not be a battle. It should be an execution. "Open a channel to the human commander," Sithrak ordered. "I want them to hear my voice before they die." The communication officer worked the controls, and a moment later, the face of a human male appeared on the main display. He looked unremarkable to Kreth eyes, with brown skin, dark hair cut short, and eyes that seemed almost bored. He wore a simple gray uniform with a handful of medals on the chest. This was Captain Samuel Grant, commander of the human fleet. "Kreth vessel," Grant said, his voice calm and unhurried. "You are in violation of 17 articles of the Galactic Charter. You have threatened a civilian population under the protection of United Earth. You have exactly 1 hour to withdraw your forces from this system. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. You have 1H. Sithrak threw back his head and laughed. The sound echoed across his bridge, and his officers joined in, their barking cries filling the air. When he recovered, he leaned toward the display, his yellow eyes bright with amusement. "Little human, do you not see the forces arrayed against you? I have 47 warships. You have 12. My flagship alone could destroy your entire fleet. You come here with threats? You dare to give orders to the Kreth Dominion?" Grant's expression did not change. 58 minutes remaining. I suggest you use them wisely. The transmission ended. Sithrak stared at the blank screen for a moment, then shook his head in disbelief. These creatures are insane. They walk into the jaws of death and speak as if they are the predator. He settled back in his chair and gestured to his weapons officer. "When they enter range, destroy them all. Leave no survivors. Let their wreckage serve as a warning to anyone else who thinks humans are worthy of respect." The hour passed slowly. The human fleet advanced at a steady pace, making no attempt to hide or maneuver. They came in a simple wedge formation, the Resolute at the center, with smaller vessels flanking on either side. Sithrak watched their approach with growing confusion. Any competent commander would try some form of tactical deception. These humans simply flew straight toward his guns. "All ships, prepare to fire," Sithrak commanded. "Target the lead vessel. I want their flagship destroyed first. Let them watch their commander die before we finish the rest." The Kreth weapons charged, filling the void with the hum of barely contained energy. Targeting systems locked onto the Resolute, calculating firing solutions that could not miss at this range. Sithrak raised his clawed hand, ready to give the order that would end this pathetic human resistance. He never got the chance. The human fleet fired first. And what happened next would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The Resolute launched something that Kreth sensors could not identify. A pulse of distorted space that crossed the distance between the fleets in less than a second. It struck the nearest Kreth cruiser, and the ship simply came apart. Not in an explosion, not in a burst of fire, but in a silent dissolution that left nothing behind but dust. The molecular bonds holding the vessel together had been broken. Every atom separated from every other atom in an instant. "What was that?" Sithrak shouted, leaping from his chair. "What kind of weapon was that?" Before anyone could answer, the human escorts launched their own attack. Torpedoes that seemed to pass through Kreth shields as if they did not exist. Electronic signals that overwrote the targeting computers on half a dozen ships, causing them to fire on each other. Beams of concentrated gravity that crumpled warships like paper in a fist. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 19 minutes. Sci-Fi watched in horror as his mighty fleet was systematically dismantled by a force 1/4 its size. The humans fought with a precision that seemed almost mechanical, each ship knowing exactly where to be and when. They anticipated every Kreth maneuver, countered every tactic, exploited every weakness. It was as if they had practiced this exact battle 1,000 times before, when the firing stopped. 39 Kreth warships were destroyed or disabled. The remaining 8, including the crippled Eternal Conquest, drifted helplessly in space with their weapons offline and their engines dead. Human losses: 2 escort frigates with moderate damage, 17 crew members wounded, 0 killed. Captain Grant's face appeared on Sithrak's display once more. The human still wore that same calm expression, as if he had just completed a routine training exercise. "Supreme Commander Sithrak," Grant said, "your fleet is defeated. Your ships will be towed to Verdun IV, where your crews will be held as prisoners, according to the terms of the Galactic Charter. You personally will be transported to Earth to face trial for war crimes against civilian populations. Do you have any questions?" Sithrak stared at the human, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. In 800 years of conquest, the Kreth had never suffered a defeat like this. They had crushed species with fleets 10 times the size of this human force. How was this possible? How could 12 ships destroy 47 in less than 20 minutes? "What are you?" Sithrak whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. Grant considered the question for a moment. "We are humans," he said simply, "and you made a very serious mistake. You threatened our people. You threatened our homes. You thought our small numbers made us weak. But we are not weak, Commander. We are efficient. There is a difference." The transmission ended, and Sithrak was left alone on his ruined bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his officers and the dying lights of his shattered empire. On Nexus Prime, High Arbiter Vex Stallone received the battle report in real time. He watched the recordings with the same expression of ancient sadness he had worn when issuing his warning. Around him, the representatives of 400 species sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. "We told them," Vex Stallone said quietly, his crystalline body dimming to a deep blue. "We told them not to provoke humanity. We told them what would happen if they did not listen." The Volanthi ambassador, who had returned after the battle was finished, moved to stand beside the Arbiter. They did not believe. The young ones never believe until they see for themselves. "And now?" Vex Stallone asked. "What happens now?" The Volanthi's energy form flickered with something that might have been fear. "Now the Kreth will respond with their full military. They will not be able to accept this defeat. Their culture will not allow it. They will send everything they have in humanity." The Volanthi was silent for a long moment. The humans have a saying. They call it poking the bear. The Kreth have not merely poked the bear. They have walked into its den and threatened its cubs. What comes next will be unlike anything this galaxy has seen in 10,000 years. Across human space, the news of the victory spread like wildfire. But there was no celebration in the halls of power. President Hayes and Admiral Blake knew this was only the beginning. The Kreth would not accept defeat. They would return with everything they had. And when they did, humanity would be waiting in his quarters aboard the Resolute. Captain Grant sat alone, staring at the stars through his viewport. He felt no joy in the victory, only the grim satisfaction of duty performed. 17 of his people were wounded. 2 of his ships were damaged. And somewhere out there, the Kreth Empire was already mobilizing for revenge. The war had barely begun, and Grant knew that before it was over. The galaxy would learn exactly what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. The throne room of Emperor Krathvalum was built from the bones of conquered species, each pillar carved from the skeletal remains of kings and generals who had dared to oppose the Kreth dominion. For 8 centuries, no enemy had ever set foot in this chamber. For 8 centuries, the Kreth had known only victory. Now, as the Emperor watched the recording of his fleet's destruction for the 5th time, something cold and unfamiliar crept into his ancient heart. It was not fear. Not yet. But it was the first crack in a wall of arrogance that had stood for generations. "They destroyed 39 warships in 19 minutes, said General Drachmer, the Emperor's chief military advisor. "They used weapons we have never seen, tactics we cannot explain. Our analysts believe they deliberately kept some of their capabilities hidden. What we saw at Verdun 4 was not their full strength. It was a demonstration." Krathvalum rose from his throne, his massive form casting a long shadow across the bone-white floor. He was older than Sithrak by 300 years, and he had personally led the conquest of 20 worlds in his youth. He knew war better than any living Kreth, and he knew that what had happened at Verdant 4 was not just a military defeat. It was an insult that could not be allowed to stand. "Mobilize everything," the Emperor commanded, his voice echoing through the hall. "Every warship, every soldier, every weapon we possess. The full might of the Dominion will descend upon these humans. We will burn their worlds to ash. We will enslave their survivors. We will make them an example that the galaxy will remember for the next 10,000 years." General Drachmer hesitated. "Sire, perhaps we should consider a diplomatic solution. The Council has offered to mediate. If we continue this war, We risk turning the entire galaxy against us." The Emperor turned slowly, his yellow eyes blazing with fury. "Diplomacy. You suggest I bow to creatures who have existed for less time than I have ruled? You suggest I accept defeat from prey animals who should be crawling at our feet?" He moved closer, his claws extended. "The Kreth do not negotiate, General. The Kreth do not retreat. The Kreth conquer, or they die trying. Am I understood?" Drakmer lowered his head. "Yes, my Emperor. The full fleet will be assembled within 14 standard days." On Earth, President Hayes stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The ancient chamber was packed with representatives from every nation, their faces grim as they listened to the latest intelligence reports. The Kreth were not backing down. They were doubling down. 800 warships were being gathered from across their empire. 12 million soldiers were being mobilized. The largest military force in galactic history was being aimed directly at humanity. "We did not start this war," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the hall. "We did not ask for this conflict. We simply wanted to live in peace, to explore the stars, to build a better future for our children. But the Kreth have made it clear that peace is not an option they will accept. They have blockaded our colony. They have threatened our people. They have declared their intention to enslave or destroy us. We have only one response to give." He paused, looking out at the faces of humanity's leaders. "We will not surrender. We will not negotiate with those who seek our destruction. We will meet this threat with everything we have. And when the war is over, the galaxy will know that humanity is not prey to be hunted. We are not victims to be conquered. We are a species that will fight to the last breath to protect our own." The assembly erupted in applause, but it was not the cheering of excitement. It was the applause of people who knew they were facing the greatest challenge in their species' history, and who had chosen to face it together. What happened next shocked every observer in the galaxy. Within 72 hours of the president's speech, humanity mobilized a fleet unlike anything they had officially declared. 340 warships emerged from shipyards and hidden facilities across 12 star systems. Ships that had been registered as research vessels revealed hidden weapon arrays. Mining platforms activated military systems that had been dormant since their construction. Commercial freighters opened their cargo bays to reveal missile launchers and rail. Gun batteries that no one had known existed. Ambassador Morrison requested an emergency session with the Galactic Council. She stood before the assembly with a calmness that many species found more disturbing than any display of anger could have been. A Kreth Dominion committed war crimes against the civilian population. A verdant for during their brief occupation, she said, her voice steady. They executed 312 civilians who refused to cooperate with forced labor demands. They destroyed cultural heritage sites that had been designated as protected under galactic law. They broadcast recordings of these atrocities as propaganda to intimidate our population. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the chamber. In accordance with Article 7 of the Galactic Charter, humanity formally invokes the right of unlimited retaliation against species that harm non-combatants. We do not make this invocation lightly. We understand what it means. But the Kreth have left us no choice. High Arbiter Vextolen leaned forward, his crystalline form flashing with colors that indicated deep concern. Ambassador Morrison, Article 7 has been invoked only 3 times in galactic history. Each time, it resulted in the near extinction of the species against whom it was invoked. Are you certain humanity wishes to walk this path? Morrison nodded slowly. We are certain. The Kreth Dominion will surrender unconditionally, or it will cease to exist as a power in this galaxy. There is no third option. There is no negotiation. There is only victory or annihilation. They chose this war. We will finish it. Admiral Catherine Blake took personal command of the combined human fleet. She had spent 40 years preparing for this moment, studying every war humanity had ever fought, analyzing every tactic that had ever succeeded or failed. Now she would put that knowledge to the ultimate test. Her strategy was not what the Kreth expected. Instead of gathering her forces for a single massive confrontation, She dispersed them across dozens of strike groups. Each group was given a specific target: supply depots, communication relays, fuel stations, minor outposts. The Kreth expected to face humanity in a grand battle where their numerical superiority would be decisive. Instead, they found their empire being eaten away from the edges, one small bite at a time. They refused to fight like civilized beings, General Drachmer reported to the Emperor. When we send a fleet to engage them, they scatter and attack somewhere else. When we fortify a position, they bypass it entirely. We cannot bring our advantage in numbers to bear against an enemy that will not stand still. Emperor Krathvalum slammed his fist against his throne. Then spread our forces to protect everything. They cannot be everywhere at once, sire. If we spread our forces, they will be too thin to resist the human attacks. Their weapons are more effective than ours. Their tactics are more flexible. Every engagement we fight, we lose more ships than they do. For the first time in 8 centuries, Emperor Krathvalum began to understand that he might be facing something his empire could not defeat. But he could not accept that truth. His culture, his entire identity was built on the certainty of Kreth supremacy. To admit that humans were their equals, let alone their superiors, would destroy everything he believed about the universe. "Bring me victory," he ordered. "I do not care how many ships we lose. I do not care how many soldiers die. Bring me the heads of their leaders or do not return at all." 6 months into the war, the Kreth Dominion had lost half its fleet. Not to grand battles, but to 1,000 smaller engagements that had bled them dry. Human forces appeared, struck, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Supply lines were cut. Communication networks were disrupted. Morale among Kreth forces was collapsing as soldiers began to realize they were fighting an enemy that simply would not give up. On Earth, families gathered each night to watch the news, hoping their sons and daughters would not be among the day's casualties. The human losses were far lower than anyone had expected, but they were not zero. Each death was felt across the connected worlds of humanity. Each name remembered and honored, and somewhere in the depths of space, Lieutenant Commander Peter Walsh led his commando unit toward their next target, the primary shipyard moon where the Kreth built their warships. If they succeeded, the war could end months sooner. If they failed, their names would be added to the list of those who gave everything for the survival of their species. Walsh looked at his soldiers. Men and women who had volunteered for a mission with a 30% survival rate. They looked back at him with steady eyes and ready hands. "Let's go finish this," he said quietly, and they followed him into the dark. The shipyard moon hung in the darkness like a metal tumor on the face of its parent planet. From its factories, the Kreth Dominion had produced 300 warships in the last century alone. Destroying it would cripple their ability to replace losses and force them closer to surrender. Lieutenant Commander Peter Walsh and his team of 42 commandos had trained for 6 months for this single mission. Now, as their stealth transport approached the moon's surface, Walsh felt the familiar calm that always came before combat. "Landing in 2 minutes," the pilot reported. "Security patrols are exactly where intelligence said they would be. You have a clear window of 4 minutes to reach the primary reactor." Walsh nodded and turned to face his soldiers. They were the best humanity had to offer, selected from thousands of volunteers. Trained in every form of warfare known to their species. Some had fought in the colonial conflicts. Others had spent years preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Now they were here, about to strike at the heart of an empire. "You all know the mission," Walsh said quietly. "Plant the charges, destroy the reactor, get to the extraction point. Simple in concept, difficult in execution. We lose this facility, the Kreth lose their ability to build new ships. This war ends months sooner. Thousands of our people live who would otherwise die. That is what we are fighting for tonight." The transport touched down on the dark side of the moon, where sensors were thin and patrols were infrequent. Walsh was first out the door, his weapon raised, his eyes scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of movement. Behind him, his team spread out in practiced formation, moving toward the facility entrance with the silent efficiency of predators. They breached the outer defenses in 37 seconds. The Kreth guards never saw them coming. Walsh led the advance through the industrial corridors, past massive machines that produced hull plating and weapon systems, past barracks where off-duty workers slept unaware of the death approaching them. They reached the reactor control room with 2 minutes to spare. "Charges set," reported Sergeant Maria Santos, Walsh's second-in-command. She was a compact woman with dark hair and steady hands that never trembled, even in the worst combat. 60 seconds to detonation. "We need to move," Walsh was about to give the order when the alarms began to wail. They had been detected. How, he did not know, but suddenly the corridors were filled with Kreth soldiers, their weapons firing streams of superheated plasma that melted through walls and armor with equal ease. Walsh's team fought back with desperate precision, every shot counting, every movement practiced. But there were too many enemies, and the extraction point was too far away. "Go!" Walsh shouted to his remaining soldiers. "I will hold them here." "Complete the mission." Sergeant Santos grabbed his arm. "We do not leave people behind, sir. That is an order, Sergeant. Get these people out. Tell command what we did here. Make sure it mattered." The charges detonated before Santos could respond. The reactor went critical, and the moon began to tear itself apart. In the chaos that followed, Walsh and 12 others were captured. The rest of the team barely made it to the extraction ship before the facility collapsed into molten slag. Emperor Krathvalum received news of the shipyard's destruction in silence. His primary production facility was gone. 30% of his remaining industrial capacity had been eliminated in a single strike. For a long moment, he simply stared at the report, his clawed hands gripping the armrests of his throne until the ancient bone cracked beneath his fingers. "Bring me the prisoners," he said finally. All of them, alive. The surviving human commandos were brought to the throne room in chains, their uniforms torn, their faces bruised but defiant. Walsh stood at the front of the group, his eyes meeting the Emperor's without fear. He knew what was coming. He had known the moment they were captured. "You have destroyed something irreplaceable," Krathvalum said, rising from his throne to tower over the humans. "Your pathetic species has dealt the Dominion a blow that will take decades to recover from. For this, you will die. But not quickly. No, I want the galaxy to see what happens to those who defy the Kreth. Want your people to watch and understand that there is no hope against us." The executions were broadcast across every frequency the Kreth could reach. They made sure the signal would be picked up by human monitoring stations, by council observers, by every species in the galaxy. They wanted everyone to witness the price of resistance. One by one, the human prisoners were brought before the cameras. Emperor Krathvalum personally wielded the ceremonial blade that would end their lives. He expected begging. He expected tears. He expected the breaking of human will that would serve as a warning to all who remained. He received something else entirely. Each soldier looked into the camera and stated their name, rank, and serial number. Then they said the same words. "We knew the risks. Finish what we started." Lieutenant Commander Peter Walsh was the second to last to die. He looked at the Emperor with something that might have been pity. "You do not understand us at all," Walsh said quietly. "You think this display of cruelty will frighten our people? You think they will see our deaths and surrender? But you are wrong. Every person watching this broadcast is not feeling fear. They are feeling anger. They are feeling the kind of rage that has no bottom and no end. You have not broken us, Emperor. You have united us. And now there is nothing in this galaxy that will stop us from destroying you." The blade fell, and Walsh was silent. Sergeant Maria Santos was the last. She had been wounded in the capture, her left arm hanging useless at her side, but she stood straight before the cameras. She looked directly at the lens, knowing that somewhere on Earth her family was watching. Her mother. Her father. Her younger brother, who had wanted to join the Marines before she talked him out of it. "Mom, Dad," she said softly, "I love you. I am sorry I cannot come home." Then she smiled, an expression that seemed utterly out of place in the shadow of death. "You have no idea what you just did," she said to the Emperor. "No idea at all." The blade fell. On Earth, the broadcast was watched by 3 billion people simultaneously. For a long moment after it ended, there was silence. Then something happened that the Kreth had not anticipated. Something their culture of violence and dominion could not comprehend. The silence transformed into purpose within hours. Every military facility on Earth was flooded with volunteers. Men and women who had spent their lives in peaceful professions demanded to serve. Factories that had been operating at 70% capacity suddenly found workers lining up for extra shifts. Scientific laboratories that had been working on theoretical projects redirected their efforts to military applications. A species that had been fighting a war now dedicated itself to a crusade. President Hayes addressed the nation with red eyes and a steady voice. "We have lost heroes today. They died with courage that will be remembered as long as humanity exists. They asked us to finish what they started. We will honor that request." Admiral Blake received her new orders and allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The politicians had finally removed all restrictions. She was no longer required to limit collateral damage or preserve enemy infrastructure for post-war reconstruction. She was no longer expected to offer surrender terms or accept anything less than total capitulation. Her mission was simple now: end the Kreth Dominion's ability to wage war by whatever means necessary. "Deploy the Genesis Protocol," she ordered. "Target the Kreth homeworld." The Genesis Protocol had been developed in secret for the last 30 years. It was humanity's final option. It's a weapon so devastating that its existence had been kept from even the highest levels of government until this moment. It was not a bomb. It was not a beam. It was a self-replicating nanotechnology swarm programmed to consume all complex machinery. It encountered as the human fleet approached the Kreth homeworld. Emperor Krathvalum gathered every remaining warship. Every defense platform, every weapon his dying empire possessed. He would make his final stand here in the skies of his ancestral planet. He would die a warrior's death, surrounded by his enemies' burning hulls. What arrived was not a siege force. It was an extinction event. The Genesis Protocol spread through the Kreth defenses like a gray tide. Ships dissolved into dust. Orbital stations crumbled and fell. Ground-based weapons simply stopped working as the nanomachines consumed every circuit and every engine and every piece of technology that made the Kreth military possible. Admiral Blake's voice echoed across the planet's surface. "Your fleet is gone. Your weapons are gone. Your civilians are unharmed. Surrender now, and your species survives. Continue to resist, and we will reduce your world to its stone age." Emperor Krathvalum looked out his palace window at the gray clouds descending through his planet's atmosphere. His ships were dust. His armies were helpless. His empire was finished. For the first time in his long life, he understood the warning he had ignored. The surrender ceremony took place in the same chamber where Ambassador Linda Morrison had first stood before the Galactic Council 3 years earlier. The Great Hall of Nexus Prime was silent now. 400 species watching as Emperor Krathvalum walked the long path to the central platform. He moved slowly, not from injury, but from the weight of a shame that no Kreth had ever known before. Behind him, the last members of his imperial court followed, with their heads bowed. The ceremonial bones stripped from their armor. Their weapons surrendered to human guards at the entrance. President Daniel Hayes waited at the platform's center, flanked by Admiral Catherine Blake and Ambassador Morrison. He wore the simple dark suit of a civilian leader, deliberately avoiding military dress for this moment. This was not a conquest to be celebrated. It was a tragedy that had been forced upon 2 species by the arrogance of one emperor. Krathvalum reached the platform and stopped. For a long moment, the ancient ruler simply stood there, staring at the humans who had broken his empire. Then, slowly, with movements that clearly caused him physical pain, he lowered himself to his knees. "The Kreth Dominion surrenders unconditionally," he said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. "We accept all terms imposed by humanity and the Galactic Council. We renounce all claims to conquered territories. We dissolve our military forces. We submit ourselves to whatever justice the galaxy deems appropriate." Hayes stepped forward and extended his hand, not in greeting, but in a gesture of conclusion. "The war is over," he said simply. Let us begin the work of building something better from its ashes." The terms were harsh, but not vindictive. The Kreths were stripped of their military, their fleet reduced to a handful of defensive vessels that would be monitored by council observers. Their conquered worlds were freed, each species given the choice of independence or incorporation into the broader galactic community. The Kreth homeworld would remain under human peacekeeping observation for the next century, their industrial capacity redirected toward reparations for the species they had harmed. But it was what happened after the formal ceremony that would truly reshape the galaxy. High Arbiter Vextolen requested permission to address the full council. When granted, he moved to the central platform with the slow dignity of a being who had witnessed millennia of galactic history. His crystalline form shifted through colors that conveyed emotions too complex for most species to interpret. 300 years ago, he began, when our long-range sensors first detected the radio signals emanating from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star, we knew we had found something unprecedented. We had encountered new species before. We had watched civilizations rise and fall across the galaxy. But humanity was different. Humanity troubled us in ways we could not initially explain. The chamber was utterly silent. Even Ambassador Morrison, who thought she understood her species well, leaned forward to hear what the ancient being would say. "We ran simulations," Vextolen continued. "Millions of them. We modeled every possible future based on the data we could gather from their transmissions. We analyzed their history, their conflicts, their art, their science, and what we found disturbed us so deeply that we issued the warning that the Kreth chose to ignore." He paused, his crystalline body dimming to a deep blue. OST species in this galaxy follow a predictable pattern of development. As they advance technologically, their capacity for violence diminishes. Their aggressive instincts fade as survival becomes assured. By the time a species achieves faster than light travel, war is typically a distant memory, something studied in history books but no longer practiced. The Arbiter turned to face the human delegation directly. Humanity is the opposite. Your capacity for violence has not diminished with advancement. It has grown more refined, more devastating, more total. You create weapons of unimaginable destruction with the same passion you use to create works of breathtaking beauty. You can show kindness beyond measure, yet wage war beyond all reason when you believe yourselves threatened. Admiral Blake met his gaze without flinching. She knew everything he said was true. "Every species in this chamber," Vextolen said, "has limits to their violence. Lines they will not cross. Horrors they cannot bring themselves to inflict regardless of the provocation. Humanity has no such limits. When pushed too far, when your families and homes and futures are threatened, you will do whatever is necessary to protect your own. And you will sleep peacefully afterward, believing with absolute conviction that your actions were justified." He turned back to address the full council. "This is why we warned the galaxy. Not because we feared humanity would conquer us. Your expansion has been remarkably restrained compared to what your capabilities would allow. We warned the galaxy because we feared what you might become if the wrong species pushed you too far." The Kreth tested that boundary. The Kreth no longer exist as they were. Ambassador Morrison rose from her seat and walked to stand beside the Arbiter. Her voice was calm but carried clearly across the vast chamber. "We know what we are," she said. "We have always known. That is precisely why we prefer peace. We understand the darkness that lives within us. The capacity for terrible things that every human carries is part of their inheritance. We have spent our entire history trying to build societies that channel that darkness into constructive purposes, that teach our children to control the fire rather than be consumed by it." She looked at the assembled species, some of whom had watched her kind for centuries with a mixture of fascination and fear. "We did not ask for this reputation. We did not seek the power to destroy empires. We only wanted to live among the stars, to explore, to learn, to grow. But we will not apologize for defending our people. We will not apologize for the strength that has kept them safe." The Council voted that day to elevate humanity to a permanent seat on the High Arbitration Council. The decision was not a reward for their victory. It was a precaution. Better to have humanity inside the power structure, helping to maintain order, than outside it, waiting to be provoked. Better to make them partners in galactic governance than leave them as unpredictable outsiders. In the months that followed, Admiral Samuel Grant, now promoted and assigned to oversee the demilitarization of the Kreth homeworld, often walked through the cities of the fallen empire. The Kreth civilians regarded him with a mixture of fear and confusion. They had been raised on stories of their empire's invincibility, taught from birth that the galaxy existed for them to conquer. Now they struggled to understand how a species so much younger than theirs had brought them so low. One evening, a young Kreth soldier approached Grant as he observed the sunset from a hilltop overlooking the capital city. The soldier could not have been more than 20 years old by human reckoning, barely an adult by Kreth standards. He had survived the war by luck and was now helping to rebuild the infrastructure that humanity's weapons had spared. "May I ask you something?" the young Kreth said, his voice hesitant in a way that would have been unthinkable for his species a year ago. Grant nodded. "Go ahead. Why do you fight like you do?" "We have studied many species. We have conquered many enemies. None of them fought the way humans fight. There was something in your soldiers that we could not understand. A fire that did not die even when they were captured and facing death." Grant was silent for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the alien sky. Finally, he spoke. "Because we have to. Because every time someone threatens our families, our homes, our future, we remember every war our species has ever fought, every loss we have ever suffered, every lesson we have ever learned. We fight as if it is the end of everything, because for us it always is. Every battle is the final battle. Every enemy is the last enemy. We cannot afford to hold back, because we know that if we fail, there will be no second chance." The young Kreth considered this. "Does your species ever grow tired of war?" Grant looked at him with eyes that held centuries of inherited memory. "Every single day. That is why we pray that no one else ever forgets the warning your emperor ignored." On Nexus Prime, High Arbiter Vexilon updated the ancient records that every species studied when they first joined the galactic community. The warning about humanity remained, now expanded to include the full history of the Kreth War. The entry read, "Do not provoke humanity. Those who forget this warning do so at their own peril." The Kreth Dominion did not listen. The Kreth Dominion no longer exists as it was. Below, in smaller text added at Ambassador Morrison's request, "We did not ask for this reputation. We did not seek this power. We only wanted to live in peace among the stars. Remember that when you consider testing our resolve. We would rather be your friends than your conquerors. But if you force us to choose, we will always choose to protect our own." 1,000 years later, historians would note that no species ever again violated the warning about humanity. The galaxy had learned its lesson. And humanity, true to their nature, continued to build and explore and create. Their capacity for destruction held in check by the same determination that made them so dangerous when released. In the end, the Kreth had taught the galaxy something valuable, even if the lesson had cost them their empire. They had shown what happened when arrogance ignored wisdom, when strength was mistaken for invincibility, when a species pushed humanity past the point of no return. The stars were quieter now, safer, not because humanity ruled them, but because everyone remembered what happened to those who forgot the warning. Do not provoke humanity. They did not obey. They should have listened.